It is the Fenway Rundown back at you on a Tuesday, March 3rd. Home studios, home battle stations, cold weather, but that'll be changing for both of us soon. I'm Chris Cotillo, who has the rest of the week off. That's Sean McAdam, who will be rejoining the Boston Red Sox in Fort Myers by the time we record again. Sean, you've been home for a week now, and it's time to start packing again. Where are you? We'll ask, how does this affect you mentally, as we ask the players that we cover?
In what sense?
Are you excited or would you rather be home? Are you
I'm happy to have gotten home, but I am looking forward to returning to some warm weather and my second stint there.
it is going to be like 62 here over the weekend as soon as you leave, which is
Well, that's okay. It'll probably be warmer than 62 in Fort Myers.
yeah, well you're going to be in that weird thing where it hits 95 at 4 p.m. Every day type of situation, which is why they play so early, but not today as they take on Team Puerto Rico. At 6:05, Jake Bennett on the mound, old friend Elmer Rodriguez on the mound for Puerto Rico. So some interesting stuff for prospect watchers, and really, if we want to get in, and we'll get into some bigger themes, really, obviously. But if you're watching the Red Sox on a day-to-day basis this week and next week, you're kind of a sicko in a good way because you're really, diving into the Braden Wards of the world and Franklin Arias and Justin Gonzalez and some of those guys who are getting an opportunity. For prospect lovers, this is a really good time because, the major league at bats, there's a ton to go around. Um, but it is a little bit tough to glean anything covering the major league team from these couple weeks where so many guys are out of camp. I know, Sean, you talked to Brez about this a few weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, feels like a month ago, about just the opportunity that different guys are going to be getting over
Yeah.
the course of this stretch during the WBC.
Yep. That is particularly true in the outfield, where literally every member of the top five outfielders are all out of camp now that Roman Anthony is part of Team
The
USA.
top
Anthony,
six, right?
uh,
Yeah,
if you're
Yoshida
counting Nate Eaton
and
among
Eaton,
the
yeah.
six, yes, that's true. Along with Masataka Yoshida, William Abreu, and Team Venezuela, Sadan Rafael of the Netherlands. So everybody is gone, 1 through 6 on the depth chart in the outfield. That means increased playing time for someone like Christian Campbell, who is looking for some pathway to get back to the major league club. The outfield would seem to be the best position suited for him, but he's got a lot of traffic in front of him. Also, youngsters like Justin Gonzalez is getting a look. We had the hard hit single heard round the world yesterday in
Mm-hmm.
Dunedin.
117, didn't
Alan,
you hear?
I did hear Alan Castro, who got as far up as Portland last year, getting some time in recent days and sure to get more over the next week or 10 days. So it's a different lineup and level that we're going to be watching in the near future. The infield isn't as disrupted with Contreras staying put and
No, he's
Durbin
gone.
there and
Contreras is
Story.
gone.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Durbin and Trevor Story there, Marcelo Meyer, a chance for a couple of depth guys to get some extra reps in the infield. So, um, the Red Sox are, I think, 13 out of the 40-man roster are off to the
Mm-hmm.
WBC. So it's a different kind of spring training and an opportunity for evaluators to see some of these guys against more major league competition. Frankly, we know that particularly on at home games when you've got a team from more than a half hour, 45 minutes away, they're not sending their best and brightest. They're sending a lot of young players who are getting a look. And so it will be for the Red Sox, both home and away, with some of these guys who are probably a year plus away from making any impact on the big league team. They're going to get an opportunity to show what they can do.
Yeah, and you got, the end of this week, obviously kind of a different week. They had a long road trip to Dunedin yesterday where, the most accomplished major leaguer in the lineup was Nick Sogard. Puerto Rico tonight, the Yankees tomorrow, and then, two long drives and probably an overnight for the guys on that trip to Clearwater and Lakeland. You're not going to see, Trevor Story and some of those guys making that trip, and then some home games and an off day once you're down there. But it's going to be different. And again, it's there's not much to take away. If there is something, two roster battles in a camp where there's not many. Let's get into number five in the rotation and the infield. We'll start with the infield, and we will get to Isaac Paredes, Jaron Durant stuff a little later because I know Twitter is, as the kids say, popping off on that right now. Um, in a Paredes less world, which the Red Sox are living in, with Durbin and Meyer at second and third, you know, they've been pretty clear that no decision is made officially, but maybe behind the scenes they have an idea. On the backfields, virtually every day, Durbin was playing third, where he played in Milwaukee last year. Meyer was playing second. Um, in game action, this is the second time they're going to be on the field together today. That is the alignment. On Sunday, when they played together, it was flipped, and Marcelo Meyer played third, and Durbin played second. Um, I'm going to still guess, even though nothing's been announced, that they are going to stick with Durbin third, Meyer second, just because it's been what they've been doing the majority of reps on now for 3 weeks. Durbin got here right when all the other position players did. He's not delayed. And I think the platooning kind of has to do with that. A guy like Monasterio and eventually Romy Gonzalez, they probably like it second instead of third to pair with Meyer. Maybe they like Connor Falefa at second better than third. I think it's about those options. To me, though, and we don't really, neither of us have gotten an up close look at Durbin defensively. It's not like we were watching the Brewers day in and day out last year. To me, if you want, Meyer's elite defense to shine, to me, third base is a more important defensive position than second. I don't know what the metrics or the newfangled technology would say on that, but I think in a perfect world, Meyer would be at third, but with the roster the way it is, I think they are looking at him as a second baseman.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there seems to be they're postponing the inevitable in making it official that Durbin is going to play third. But by all the evidence in front of us, as you noted, he's been playing far more third than second. It's the position he played last year, even though he's played second in the minors. It makes sense to me to have Durbin be the third baseman and Meyer be the second, which is why I don't understand all of this Isaac Paredes talk. It's been resurrected, as you hinted at, and apparently is not dead, even though the Red Sox seem to have been finished reshuffling their infield with the acquisition of Durbin to play third. If you get Paredes, he's going to be at third, and Durbin's going to be at second. That's my first objection, because I think Durbin's a better third baseman than Paredes is. So you're playing Durbin a little out of position, and you're taking a step back in terms of the glove you're going to get at third with Paredes there instead of Durbin. You are probably consigning Marcelo Meyer to Worcester to start the year. It doesn't make a lot of sense for him to be a guy coming off the bench when he could use more development time at AAA and more at bats. So that part we can debate. What I don't like is the notion of giving up Jaron Duran for Isaac Paredes. And I understand that Duran's value is not what it was 2 years ago, coming off his 24th season when he was the Red Sox MVP, the MVP of the All-Star game, and looked like he was ticketed for superstardom. We know that 25 was a step back for him. He wasn't nearly as consistent. His play in left field was not nearly as good as it had been in center. But still, I think there is a high ceiling for Jaron Duran. He's athletic. He's got some power. He can run. He can play good outfield defense, though he is better suited for whatever reason in center field. But he's got 3 years of service time remaining. Include him in a deal for a guy who's got 2 years. That would be Isaac Paredes. And we're going to assume that there would be another part coming from Houston, likely a bullpen arm, maybe a lefty to help them fill that hole. I don't do that. I don't think about doing that. Number one, I'm not a huge Paredes fan. That's been documented over the winter. He's okay. He's not a game changer for me. And I just think if you're going to move on from Duran, and I think the case can be made for doing that, that you should be getting a lot more than Isaac Paredes plus in exchange for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think my devil's advocate on this would have been a few weeks ago, a month ago, if you trade Duran for Paredes instead of, Durbin, and Durbin's not part of the picture. I think that is a move that makes your roster a lot more functional. If you get Paredes plus for Duran, it makes your roster more functional. The DH at bats are available. Roman could play left every day. You move on from a pretty good hitter in Duran, but you're getting some offense back with Paredes. He slots in at third. Meyer plays second, and it just your roster. It kind of unclogs a lot of the pipes. Now the pipes are even more clogged because Durbin's here, and I think when that trade happened, we were very, very clear on here and in writing and everything. They did not give up much for Caleb Durbin. I think, not neither of us are super high on the Harrison Hamilton Drowan package and probably would have made considering, Monasterio looks like a useful piece too. Looks like the Red Sox, for the price, got a pretty good deal there. We'll
Yep,
obviously see
agreed.
how that plays out over time. But so that's probably a deal they couldn't pass up. And at that point, you have to think, wow, the door's closed on Paredes. Now, the ramifications of making this deal again, would be now it doesn't really make your roster that much more functional because of Durbin being here. It would be horrible news for Meyer, and which a guy we talked about at length the other day. So I think Houston still wants to trade him, and they're having trouble. The suitors that were mentioned were the Red Sox who got Durbin. The Pirates made a couple of moves. They added Ozuna as a DH. They reshuffled a little bit. Maybe they enter the fray again. But when you look at the Houston infield situation, as Ken Rosenthal wrote today, with Christian Walker, Paredes, Correa, Pena, Altuve, all those guys mixing and matching, it's pretty similar to what the Red Sox have in the outfield. And in a perfect world, maybe, you know, 40 years ago and teams made trades for needs and stuff, you could swap those guys and both teams would have more functional rosters. But with control, with, what Durant can give you on both sides of the ball with speed, it's not a fair trade. And it comes down to, can you get a good prospect along with him? Maybe they're willing to do that. Still, it's horrible news for Marcelo Meyer. And to me, like, this is at the point where, there's been so much Meyer discourse, so much of it like complete BS, obviously, and we talked about that on Friday. Um, to me, like this is the year you got to figure out what you have in Marcelo
Yeah,
Meyer.
I
Period.
agree. It's time to go. And if they were to start the year with Meyer at second, unsure of what they're going to get out of him, that's not the end of the world. They have established big league players at every other position. All four outfielders, your first baseman now, your shortstop, your third baseman, your starting catcher. You have guys where healthy what to expect from those guys. If you start the year with one of nine everyday players being a little uncertain,
Hmm.
well, which way is this going to go? What can he do? Can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? Can he hit lefties? There are questions that we don't know the answers to about Marcelo Meyer. But by getting Paredes and having Durbin, that's 7 years of control between those two.
Yeah, right.
You're not only locking him out for 2026, but you're doing it for 27. Where's the path forward for Marcelo Meyer?
Right.
It's unlikely to be at shortstop because Trevor Story has a year after this, and I don't see Meyer taking over and becoming the starting shortstop in 27 if second and third are both filled. It makes no sense to me. Again, I think that Duran can be flawed, but you are not getting close to equal value if Isaac Paredes is the return here. Get a mid-level starter, get a young outfield, a young power prospect that you're really high on. That might be something that's lacking in the system, pure power that is close to being ready to contribute. This is a backward move.
Yeah. Well, they haven't done it, so
No,
we're
I'm saying if it were to
right.
happen, it would. I think it makes them worse.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think like now that it's almost here and we're 3 weeks away, this whole idea of like, they can't go in there with all four outfielders and Yoshida. I mean, there are worse things in the world than, again, we both think Yoshida is just the odd man out here and something's going to give there. But there are worse things in the world than, Duran, Rafaela, Abreu, and Anthony being in your lineup every day and getting a couple of those guys off their feet and preserving them for the long run and having, if one of them gets hurt, which is going to happen inevitably, someone who could immediately fill in, and then you figure out the DH role. I mean, any team would want to have that situation. So while it doesn't look great on paper, the Sox are okay with it. I think like their need to move one of those guys is a lot less, than maybe Houston's need to move one of those guys. But yeah, it's funny because I said this somewhere else, I think on someone's pod recently, but Isaac Paredes has seen his stock rise in the eyes of Red Sox Nation so much since December when it was like, oh, they're either going to get him or Alonso or Schwarber. It was like, God, Isaac Paredes is awful. We don't want him. And then as time went on, by February, people were like excited about him, and now, I think people are split. But no, that one for one trade is not a fair one. So there'd have to be other pieces. Um, Interesting that it's being brought back up. I just think there's, the Red Sox at this point, I think everybody assumed the heavy lifting was done, and I still feel that way. But maybe they look at who they have in camp and think we really don't have any power on this team, and it's really a worse problem than we thought. I don't know. I don't know why it's
Oh,
coming back up.
that's not a irrational thought to have, but how does Isaac Paredes change that greatly? I
Yeah,
mean, he can give you 15 to 20, but he's hardly a renowned and proven run producer.
31 in 2023. So, and then 19,
Outlier,
and then
right?
20, and then 20. Well, he didn't. I mean, games played. He played 140 for one of the only two times in his career and hit 31 in 2024. 153 games, 19 homers last year, 102 games, 20 homers. So, you're probably looking at somewhere if he's fully healthy, 24, 25.
Okay, that to me is not a proven home
Yeah,
run hitter. That's I don't want to, saying it's a complimentary bat is underselling him,
right,
but he's not someone that is single-handedly going to change your offensive profile as a team and have you think, well, now we can sock, now we
right.
can slug. He's a guy that would lengthen the lineup. And when you look at how untested and unproven Marcelo Meyer is, it's logical to assume that Paredes would hit more home runs in 2026 than Meyer would if they played a similar number of games. But and I understand that there's a goal and an expectation to win in 26. You got to the playoffs last year.
Hmm.
Now the expectation is to go further than you did and have a better October, a deeper run into the postseason. And you're focused on winning after a number of years where you didn't make the playoffs. But this is not a win or bust kind of season when you look at a lot of the developing and young talent they have between
Right.
pitchers, like Tolley and Early, and young position players who have yet to even approach their prime, guys like Abreu and Anthony and Meyer. This just makes no sense to me. I don't get where this is going to solve any big problems 3+ weeks from opening day.
Yeah. And I think that's why the two of us look at it at this point as still just a rumor and one that's, less likely than it would have been before the Durbin trade. You touched on Toley and Early. I touched on them yesterday in a kind of a, uh, an evergreen type of story. I think people look at when you write something and be like, oh, there's something going on here. And it's funny because a lot of people took it as, well, those guys are starting the year in AAA. If Brian Bayo and Ranger Suarez get hurt in the next 2 weeks, then Tolley and Early are going to be in your opening day rotation. So, but the point of the story I wrote, which we probably could have done in the offseason or an opening day or whenever, but it was a space filler on a Monday when there wasn't much going on, just because it's one of those evergreen things.
Way to pump up
Way to sell
your
it high, yeah.
reporting.
um, was just the reality of the service time clock for these two guys. And I think, it's a part of the equation that's huge to each team, and it should be the way business is constructed in baseball. Maybe this changes after a lockout and a new CBA, but they play by the rules of the road right now. It's a huge factor in the eyes of these teams, and I think fans and us, we are all maybe underplaying it a little bit. So just, crunching the numbers. It wasn't a huge number crunch. I didn't have to take out the CPA typing machine, but I had to look at just basic math, and it comes down to this. Because those guys were called up last year for very small sample size in the regular season, playoffs don't matter for this. Um, they are at a place where their service time is once again a topic of discussion. So if Connolly early, who I think anybody would agree, maybe doesn't have the ceiling of Peyton Tolley, but right now is probably the more major league ready starting pitcher than Tolley. That's no knock on Tolley. He's just raw. He's had 1 year versus the two. 35 days, that is 5 weeks for Connolly early, and 46 days for Peyton Tolley. That's about 7.5 weeks. If those guys spend that at any point, cumulative, not consecutive, in AAA this year, the Red Sox get, their age 29 season instead of having them go to free agency after 28 in the case of early, Tolley's a few months different. But I mean, to me, that is something that if they had not gotten Oviedo and they hadn't gotten Suarez and they were going into this with, Crochet, Gray, Bayo, Crawford, Sandoval, and these two guys, then you'd be like, well, is there a case to be made here that, one of these guys is better than the other? But now I think it's just pretty obvious. Like they've built up the depth so they can do this, at least in part, and give them the development time. And I don't think anybody can sit here and make the argument and say if those guys start at AAA, it's BS, and they shouldn't because they're ready to be, a
Yeah.
162
Well,
game major league
I think
starter.
that's an important. I think it's an important point
Right.
to echo that service time. I don't even want to use the word manipulation because I don't think they're being manipulated
Right.
here.
Totally
But
agree.
service time benefit is a byproduct of this, not a goal.
Yeah.
The fact that
But a
by
factor
starting
regardless.
the year, right, but by starting the year at AAA, there is the potential for the Red Sox to get an extra year on the back end here, but it's not why they're starting at AAA. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and again, if if somebody gets hurt from the first four over the
Right.
next 3 weeks,
They'll be up, and that thing
yeah,
goes out the window where they're not saying, "Well, we gotta go sign some guy off the street to
right,
be the
right,
number five because the clock's ticking and we can't bring early up for another 3 weeks." They won't do that,
yeah,
or
but
should
what
they?
um for opening day, those guys would be the fill-ins because Crawford and Sandoval probably won't be fully ready at that point. Sandoval, I don't think will be fully stretched out. He looks to me like the long reliever on this team as of now, and Crawford's probably going to be IL/rehab assignment at that point. But if somebody gets hurt in mid-April, then Crawford becomes a guy or Sandoval becomes a guy, and you're able
Mhm.
to, let these guys kind of have some time in Worcester. And it's no knock on what they think the future of these guys is. But I think there's a case to be made that as of right now, would you rather have Oviedo or Early or Tolley? I mean, there's people that are going to look at things in different ways, but those considerations all kind of point to Oviedo and then a good outing yesterday. So I think it just boils down to like, you know, any team would be smart to try to have early B in the minors for 5 weeks at any time. That could be 2 weeks at the beginning, 3 weeks in June, could be five 1 week stints over time. Just to it's going to get to a point at some point, Sean, where this is going to be a real topic of discussion where they are getting close to having him under for a year and there's a need in the rotation and they give a
Yeah.
spot start to Tyler Uberstein or something because of it and it's going to be outrage. But it's just an important thing to point out that it is real. And they're in this position because the knock on service time considerations as well. They're planning for 6 years from now, and they're cheap and all this stuff, which of course doesn't play in. But they're in this position because they got ultra aggressive with these two guys down the stretch. The fact that neither of them were in big league camp shows you that a year ago neither of them were really in consideration for the major league staff, especially Tolley, who had never thrown a professional pitch at this time last year. They got to a point where they wanted to win. They thought these guys had a chance to help them down the stretch. They did. Tolley was up and down. Early was more consistent, and by doing that, They started the service clock where they're now in this boat. And something that, I mentioned briefly, and it's not a huge deal in the grand scheme, but they clogged, and clogged is not the right word because they're very good, or they have the potential to be really good, but they stopped up two 40-man spots that are going to be, taken now for a long time where you have to make kind of weird decisions like trading Tristan Gray when
Yeah.
those types of things.
And all that stuff last fall happened because they were hit by injuries,
Right.
right? You didn't have Giolito available to start one of those games. So for game 3 of your only playoff series of the year, you're turning to a guy who had made 3 appearances or 4 appearances
Hmm.
in the big leagues out of desperation. And that's not saying that, Connolly early was not close to being ready for that. He actually pitched okay, got let down by the
Right.
defense behind him, didn't seem to be unnerved, had 6 strikeouts in 3 2/3 innings, I think it was, in that game at Yankee Stadium. Showed good stuff, showed poise, but it was a commentary on the pitching depth that they lacked at that point, where they're turning to a guy with so little experience to start a winner go home playoff game.
Yep. And so to me, like I think the writing is on the wall for if Oviedo comes out and walks the world and is wild and does not throw strikes and the stuff is there, but he can't command it like he did in his first outing, then the pathway to, one of those guys taking that spot and taking it temporarily and then be shuttled up and down is open. But if he does what he does yesterday in Oviedo, I mean, he's going to be the guy that, they obviously gave up a lot for him with the password. Not that either of us think he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's, highly ranked prospect for a number 5 starter. And I think that there's a pretty good chance that he is the guy on opening day. Now we are 3.5 weeks away. The top 4 in the rotation, they're all on track, all good. Half of the group is at the WBC. An injury could change things in a heartbeat. But for now, I think Oviedo, and I assume you agree with that.
Yes. Yep.
And so, things, outings like yesterday against some big leaguers on the road against Toronto will only help.
Yep.
So that's the Fenway rundown for today. Sean will have you covered in Fort Myers for at the end of the week, back live in person. Chris Smith will join him down there after a few days, and then I will be taking up the end of camp. So plenty of coverage on the site, video diaries, all that
Like
type of stuff.
Marcelo Meyer, you will be given the baton and asked to run with
I
it.
will be asked to run with it. We'll see what these legs can do.